Jacqueline West, you designed the costumes for Dune Part 2, and you were also the designer for Part 1. Having already done so much world building and character building in the first film, what was the experience like expanding on that this time around?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get my team back almost to the person because people were so into it. And uh, the beauty of that was the same hands that uh, made all the costumes for Dune 1 with the same hands on Dune 2. So it was really, it's not a sequel, it's really the second part of the novel. So it was really nice to have that continuity. And Dune 2 was much more complex, of course, because we were world building worlds that we just touched on in Dune 1. Like we really explored the whole world of Gadi Prime. We went into the Emperor's world. Um, there were many more characters from these different worlds, so it was much bigger undertaking. But having created the basis with Dune 1, it was quite smooth actually. And Denis and I by that time had a real dialogue, and I really understood exactly uh, what his vision was, and was able to, I think, give it to him to even a greater extent in Dune 2.
And how was that collaboration with Denis? Did he have a very clear vision of the costumes? How much sort of freedom did you have, and how did that go?
He gives me a lot of freedom. And of course, I show him everything every step of the way. Actually, we create mannequins with the characters totally dressed on them and put some of the characters together that will be in the scene so you can see how the clothes will work together cinematically. And um, though he gives me a lot of freedom, I until I get that I deeply love it, Jacqueline, I don't stop. He doesn't tell me what to do, but he has a very strong vision of what he wants. He doesn't always articulate it, but he knows when he sees it. And so when I walk him through, I can see he has a gut reaction to clothing and to costumes. He knows if they're right for the character that he's trying to um, uh, portray on screen. So he has quite and he's very visual and very detail oriented, which I love, and very collaborative. Um, like for the picadors in Dune 2, he brought me a little stick drawing of this black character. And I went from there and created those magnificent costumes that we call, you know, demonic picadors from old bullfighting arenas of Spain. So, uh, but it's his reaction that I wait for. Until I get that reaction that he deeply loves it, I keep working.
And we spend more time with the Fremen in Part 2. How did you conceptualize those characters and their culture in the costumes?
Well, I drew from, I think, so many Middle Eastern cultures and tribes, and North African, from the Middle East to Bedouin to Tuareg. And I tried to make them an amalgamation of all Middle Eastern, Eastern, North African nomadic uh, peoples. And I really love how, for instance, the Tuaregs on the salt trails, on the camels, they reminded me of the Fremen riding the worms when they're all the robes blow in the wind, and they kind of blend with the desert, and the movement of the robes kind of echoes the shifting sands. If you've ever been in North Africa and in the Sahara, and the way the sands and the dunes shift with the wind and with the light. And I thought that giving the Fremen these kind of Middle Eastern dash Tuareg kind of wrappings and robes would really add to their silhouettes and their power, and also their mystery. I always think that camels, the camel riders, the Tuaregs on the salt trails look so mysterious. And it was an acre of lines at Origo in Hungary of fabrics all dyed and drying in all different colors, and they blow in the wind in the morning, and it would just make my heart fly to see them. And he created. We used a lot for the prints. We used a lot of uh, an alphabet was created for the language of the Fremen called Chicopsa, and he used a lot of that alphabet in creating the designs that you see printed on all the wrappings. And I also kind of always feel there's some kind of religious medieval allegory to Dune. And so that shape you see in so many medieval paintings that became part of the design also.
The second film also introduced Fade, played by Austin Butler, this very severe, sadistic character, of course. How did you approach his costume, creating him?
Well, I wanted him, just knowing the history of previous Dunes, the one from the 80s and then the one that didn't get made by Jodorowsky, they seem to feel that rock stars was an influence on that character. And I think in the Jodorowsky it was Mick Jagger and then Sting in the 80s version. And I think that was at the back of my mind. And Austin having just played Elvis, I thought, oh, he's perfect. And he does have that kind of Mick Jagger swagger when he walks. And I thought I wanted to keep him a rock star, but also make him quite sadistic. He just got voted some film critics award as the most evil villain of the year in film, and I think he portrayed it so beautifully sadistically and darkly. So I used that kind of, I wanted that kind of feeling, but he also had to be bald because hair isn't sexy to the Harkonnens, and he had to wear black because that's their culture. And in June 1, I kind of based it all on Geiger art, and so I wanted his to be a reflection of that, and for him to be the next generation of the Baron. Um, and so that's what kind of started the design. And then something interesting happened because the gladiator scene is all shot in infrared. uh, Black doesn't always stay black. Different materials will photograph as white. So it was quite complicated creating his costumes that are in the infrared part of the movie. I had to camera test every piece that made up that costume, which is made of many, many parts. It's quite intricate, his gladiator costume. And so that was a challenge. But really, I just, first with Denis, we came up with the idea of how the Harkonnen would be. They're like black insects. And as you know, insects have many different shiny black parts to them. I'm thinking of spiders. And we wanted that him to be able to articulate his and move just like an insect. And so that's where that kind of you know, costume that's all hinged together and moves so beautifully on his body and still keeps his wonderful shape. That's where that was inspired.
The Benny Gesserit characters have some of the most memorable costumes, some of them very elaborate. What inspired some of their looks?
Well, the ancient Bene Gesserits, the one that you see when Fade faces off with Paul, those costumes, they were kind of inspired by Egyptian Mother Mohiam and her group. They're like black nuns and very dark. And they were inspired, Mother Mohiam and all the black veiled women that follow her around that you see in the gladiator scene on Gedi Prime. They were all inspired by the tarot cards, the old Mediterranean ancient set of tarot cards. And I think the Queen of Swords. I can't remember which ones I actually used. It's been 2 years now. But and then as I said, the ancient Bene Gesserits that you see in the fight scene, all lined up by Lady Jessica behind her. They were all kind of Egyptian inspired.
Between the the main characters, the supporting characters, extras in the film, how many costumes would you say you ended up crafting?
4,000.
And how long does that kind of that kind of work take just in general?
About a year. Yeah,
Uh,
we had a lot of makers. We had 80 people working in-house, and then we outsourced a lot of the armor and the specialty costumes to outside vendors, and where I'd have to visit them and check on everything. And it was quite complicated.
and when there's so much physical action involved in the story, how do you take into account movement and combat when designing?
Well, we worked very closely with the stunt coordinator, and uh, I always show them the costumes and usually put them on a fit model, and he checks the movement. And if he thinks that the costume articulates enough to accommodate those movements, and then you get them on the actor, and um, they know they've already rehearsed all their action and they know what they have to do. So it kind of, um, that informs us if we have to make any corrections or open up certain parts of it for freer motion. Fortunately, all the Fremen armor was established in one, and we had all the kinks out before we started shooting one. So the Fremens were good to go. Some of the Harkonnens we had to tweak, especially for Fade. When I saw the extent of his action, how complicated it was, and how balletic. So we made a few adjustments on his costume, but pretty much that's all sorted before we get the actor in it, working with the stunt coordinator.
And what would you say was the most challenging aspect of designing costumes for the film?
I'd say creating all the distinct worlds and really giving each character his own personality conveyed through his costume. I always feel that the costume is the bridge between the actor and the character, and it has to be character driven. And you kind of know that when you put it on an actor and it changes how they stand. They start even doing their motions, and you can see they stand differently, they behave differently. And uh, I think that's the biggest challenge that I have, and that's the most rewarding is when I see that happen. It's and then creating all these different worlds to make them distinct and make sure it's how Denise sees it, because he's been living with this story since he was 12 years old, I think. So you have this, he lights a fire under us all to get it right. He's passionate about it.
And Dune, of course, is futuristic sci-fi, and you've also designed costumes for a number of period films in your career. How different is the creative process designing for the past versus designing for the future?
Oh, it's exactly the same for me because the past is a period too. And I've been reading Frank Herbert and his personal writings and talking about Dune. He said you can't explore the distant future unless you look at the distant past. And I relied on that. So a lot of my references, I always rely on when I'm doing a period film in the past, I rely on a lot of photographs and a lot of paintings and also the written word. There's sometimes you get more reading about a certain period than you do from photographs because certain writers are so cinematic in their writing. They kind of describe scenes so perfectly, right up to what everyone was wearing. But for Dune, I did use a lot of medieval references for both Dune 1 and 2, as I said, and I I call it mod evil, but it's the same process for me. I try to keep everything, nothing's fantasy for me. I try to keep everything real and grounded, and nothing to make believe. I want it all to look real and like it's grounded in some kind of past reference, which everything is.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on Dune, and thank you so much for talking to me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Of course, great questions. You're a wonderful interviewer.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.